OG Rose here, and today we're going to be talking about a more casual reflection called Anxiety and Schrödinger's Conceivability Structures on personally experiencing our lack of omniscience, the impossibility of particularizing general conceivability structures, and the existential consequences. It's impossible to escape having a worldview or philosophy. The battle is to keep it from becoming an ideology, as this paper will define those terms, or something that does our thinking for us. Worldviews are structured like stories, but very problematically so are conspiracies, philosophies, ideologies, and the like. And so we can't simply from the structure identify if the structure of thought is a conspiracy, a worldview, an ideology, or so on. We can't just tell from the form. And the paper is going to argue that it is very natural for us to gradually only comprehend and assent the world through mental faculties. And the moment we stop trying to understand the world full body, with emotional faculties, methods of ascension without physical, experiential, when we stop engaging in a concert of different methods of mental apprehension, then it is very likely for our worldview or philosophy to become exclusively a resident of our mind. And once that occurs, it's probably going to do our thinking for us, and it's probably going to become an ideology, to kind of allude to that Marxist ideas. Now keep this in mind as we talk about conspiracy, which I think is a really tricky term. A conspiracy is a quote-unquote secret plot, which is possibly true or false. But you see, people also use it today to kind of mean an arrangement of coincidences or happenstances, fragments of data, in a manner to make the appearance of a scheme or plot that isn't actually real. So it's like all these pieces come together and look like something, but it's all fictitious. And with that second definition of conspiracy, it's always fake, and there's no such thing. But since we use the term conspiracy both in a way to just mean a secret plot, which may be true, and also to mean the sort of Thomas Pynchon sort of narrative structure of appearance of intentionality and meaning that isn't there, and I think we get very confused. And also, really importantly, if we're viewing a possible theory or a possible truth, it's going to have the same structure, what I'm calling in this work a conceivability structure, as a conspiracy. So you can't just tell by looking at a structure of ideas if it's true or if it's false. And that means you have to investigate it. Well, my goodness, you can't investigate everything, and how can you investigate it? But unless you do that, you're not going to be able to tell for sure if there's truth to the schema that you're examining, and or if there's falsity. And considering what we said earlier, I especially think if we're only able to consider the conceivability structure, which could be a truth, which could be a conspiracy, which could be a falsity, but if we can only consider it in terms of the mental, then there's no way for us to actually tell if what we're dealing with is something that has truth to it or something that is completely false. We find ourselves so then we have to investigate. But if we do that and to try to use other forms of apprehension, it might be like that show Made in the Abyss, where the deeper we go, the more we can't, the further we fall and we can't ever go back. And that could be a problem. And it also brings to mind kind of what Wittgenstein says in Uncertainty, which is where he says it belongs to the logic of our scientific investigation that certain things are indeed not doubted. We just can't investigate everything, and for that reason we are forced to rest content with assumption. If we want the door to turn, the hinge must stay put. So what Wittgenstein wants to say is that in order for us to practically operate, we have to have certainty, or something like certainty. I'm going to argue it's actually confidence, that certainty is impossible. But when it comes to these schemes, or these conceivability structures that could be a conspiracy, that could be a truth, that could be a philosophy, but we can't tell from the outside, we have to act certain about them being either true or false, even though we can't be epistemically justified to do so. We're just forced to, if we're going to operate. And the more and more the internet spreads, the more and more globalization grows, and the more and more we personally experience this dilemma, the more we can feel a certain existential weight. When we have, that becomes very hard to live with. When we have the internet, we just feel like we should be able to learn everything, but it's not possibly It's not possible. It's not practically possible, but we feel like it should be. And that becomes something very hard to live with. Also, the paper is going to point out, the larger the state, the larger the system, the corporation, whatever, then the more impossible it becomes to comprehend any plot that is derived about that large system. The more impossible it becomes to think about that in terms beyond just mere mental ascension, mere mental comprehension. So, for example, if I live in Rustburg, Virginia, and I hear that there is a drug ring conspiracy in Lynchburg, Virginia, where I can drive over there, it's possible for me to examine it. And since it only involves the Lynchburg government, it would be more doable to investigate that. But what if I heard that China was engaged in cyber crime, cyber terrorism to steal my private data, and I lived in Virginia? Well, even if I flew over there, it wouldn't be possible. How in the world would I infiltrate the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party? What part of it would I infiltrate? How would I find this to be the case? It just simply becomes impossible. I can mentally apprehend to the idea that the CCP is taking my data, but I can't do much more than that. I can't approach that possibility, that conceivability structure, in any better than simply a mental ascension. And so I just have to live with the idea. An idea that can have real consequences for my life, and that may have no truth to it at all, but I cannot tell simply from the comprehension of the idea in mental terms if there is truth to it or if there's just falsity to it. And it sounds plausible that the Chinese Communist Party is stealing my data. It sounds plausible, and so it sounds like it's worth investigating, but I simply cannot. Worse yet, as a system becomes large, it becomes increasingly impossible to investigate it beyond mental terms. But as a system becomes larger, there's a long tradition that suggests power corrupts, and the larger a system is, the more likely it is to corrupt. And so the larger something becomes, the more I probably have reason to need to investigate it, and yet the more impossible it becomes to do that beyond mere mental apprehension. And if I cannot from mental apprehension move to more of a state of confidence about if the idea of what the state is doing is true or false, which, if it's doing something bad, a real conspiracy, if I can't move beyond that, well, then there's no way for me to stop the state. There's no way for me to be sure if it's really engaged in a plot against me or not. And so it's especially bad. So as a system becomes larger, the more impossible it becomes to be sure of what the state is doing, and yet the more likely we'll be doing something corrupt. So it's a double whammy. It's bad on two fronts. And all this because of the internet we have to experience right in front of us. It's not something, the growth of the state and all of the conspiracies or ideas or narratives that people come up with to explain the world around us. So we have to live with them, and we have to see them, and we have to emotionally feel them. And I think this is unique, and I think this is a new situation, and so the question becomes, what do we do now? So for more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, and thank you for your time.